Violence isn't a sport. War is not a sport. Jiu Jitsu is a sport when you compete. Realistically, just because I'm being trained to go ahead and fight somebody, like in Jiu Jitsu, doesn't mean that I should go and fight someone out in fucking real life. Because you're going to learn really quick. Some of that shit doesn't work.
Hello, friends. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the Mayn Idea Podcast, where today I have the pleasure of sitting down with George Briones III. There's now a website for the show. Check out www.maynideapodcast.com or click the link in the show notes and become part of the community. If you join the mailing list, you will be the first to get access to Ask Me Anything, show merchandise, products that I'm using to help me perform at my best, future events related to the show, and the book club. We're reading one book a month through the year, so join the mailing list to get updates on which books we're reading in advance. You can also find links to connect as a potential show guest or sponsor. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave a donation to help keep the lights on. But for the true fans of the show that want to see it continue, please take 30 seconds and leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify and subscribe to the YouTube. This helps the show get discovered organically and helps me to continually bring on incredible guests. There's also now timestamps in the show notes, so feel free to jump around to the part that interests you most, although I always recommend listening to the episode in its entirety. George Briones III is a former Recon Marine, owner of GB3 Athletics, Jiu Jitsu practitioner, and tactical performance coach. I hope that you enjoy this episode as much as I did. Without further ado, George Briones III. George, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day and joining me on this. I'm stoked that Casey connected us. He said this is going to be a great episode, and the more I read up on you and prepared for it, I think he's 100% right. So I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day.
No, man, appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me on. And of course, Casey always shooting my name out to people to go ahead and get my story out. So I appreciate him so much as well.
For those listening, they don't know, this is the 9th attempt at doing this because of internet connection issues. So we've bared with it. We're here. When you look back to your career as a Reconnaissance Marine and your time spent training martial arts, both of these endeavors take a lot of time. They take a lot of persistence. They take a lot of physical effort, and you have to have a mentality that allows you to keep moving forward when pretty much everything in your body is telling you to stop.
Yeah.
What is something that you've picked up from martial arts that you did not learn or acquire from your time in the Marines?
Well, before we got cut off, I was on a deep rabbit hole of what this actually was for me. Now that we get to do it the second time, I'm going to be able to simplify it because it was.
You got some practice.
Yeah, I got some practice, but I want to simplify it. It's re-taught me how to utilize escalation of force, I guess is the term I want to use. As a reconnaissance Marine, when I joined the Marine Corps, I didn't know I was going to become a reconnaissance Marine. I didn't know that I was going to go to war. Even though I signed up and volunteered to get into the military during a time of war, that's how naive I was and innocent to what was going on around me. I didn't know. I mean, yes, I remember the 9/11 incidents. I remember people going to Fallujah, but it never was really clicked to me. So what I learned in the Marine Corps was like 0 to 100. Hey, you get shot at, it's game on. Hey, buddy steps on an IED, and then all of a sudden there's a complex ambush. It's game on. And when we went to Afghanistan, especially in 2010, I did 2 deployments. I did one in Iraq, and we got to do a lot of aerial patrols. When I say aerial, I mean like area patrols. I mean we're doing a lot like vehicle reconnaissance, just looking for things, collecting intel. But in Afghanistan, like we became some like really, the way we call it was we were glorified grunts. We were able to jump, shoot, dive, communicate. We had snipers all with us. We weren't just an infantry unit. Like we were a reconnaissance Marine. We were collecting intel, but we were also there to put the fight to the enemy because we were the secret squirrels of that time period, or the night walkers, or whatever you want to label us. We got called the saint. We were named the sons of Satan while we're out there in Afghanistan. Wow. That's what they labeled.
Wait, you were within your own unit, or that was
within
the
our
perception
unit,
from
within our unit. Yeah. So 1st Recon Battalion in 2010 was named the Sons of Satan by Taliban. Like that's.
I mean, that's a good thing for you guys, right?
So
Like that inflicts fear in the enemy?
Yes, but what did it do to us internally, though? Because I tell you what now, we've lost multiple guys by their own hands due to internal gunshot wounds that they've
Yeah.
had to deal with to be labeled sons of Satan.
You go back to this time. This is an interesting thing that I've talked about this with other service members before, and it always kind of fascinates me because when you enlist, you know what you're signing up for, right? Like you are not enlisting to be a substitute teacher at a preschool. You're not enlisting to be a garbage man. Like you are enlisting to fight, to shoot, to go to war, to be physically prepared, all these kind of things. But there seems to be a collective disconnect for not for all, but for many between that and like, oh wait, this is no respawns. This is on. And it's now, and I'm going now.
Yeah.
What was that initial, like that digestive process in your head when you get that call, and you realize this is actually for keeps? Like this is really going on. What was that like for you?
So I guess for me, the real call wasn't the phone call. It wasn't the phone ringing. It was the first gunshot that went by my head.
Yeah.
Like the first bullet that flew by my ear. And I've talked about this before in a couple other videos, and me talking about the challenges I faced and how to like disconnect from it but still respect it. And it was like there's three different types of gunshots, fires. There's one that you know is for you, the one that's like, oh, that was close, but it wasn't for me. It was for someone else probably by me in my vicinity. And then it was like, oh, that's just a warning shot. And the one you know that's for you is the snap by the ear. Because it breaks that barrier, and you're like, and it gives you chills. You feel the vibrations of the bullet. You're just like, whoa, that was for me. That's when I knew it was like, oh, I'm no longer playing cops and robbers like if I was in the backyard in Converse in Texas, a part of the Lone Star militia paintball team that I was in at the age of 11, 12 years old. That's no longer what I'm doing. Someone's trying to kill me. What am I supposed to do? What do you do? Like, what do you do in that moment? Like, that's like instilled for me in that to today, right? It's like all I knew was to go ahead and apply the skills that I had been drilled thousands of hours for that moment. And then that moment now lasts 7 hours that first day, the next day, another 7 hours the next day. And then by the time you know it, you've been out on their land for 60 days. You haven't been back to base. You've been living out of your ruck. You've been living out of people's houses. You've been the scary monster to the little kids at 2 a.m. in the morning, knocking on their door, saying, we're taking over your compound. We're going to tie you up and hide you in the back of that room so that we can fight from this post for the next 2 days. Because if we let those people go, even if we pay them off, guess what happens to them? They're either dead because the Taliban feels like they traded against them, or we're dead because they go tell them.
Right. It's a 0-0 error game that you're playing. 0 errors across the board.
Across the board.
So you talked about this falling back on your training. I think that's probably a theme that will show up a lot in this conversation of that preparation in those moments. And I have no leg to stand on here because what you're talking about is such a different level of intensity and realness than us civilians will hopefully ever understand. But that starts this new timeline for you, right? Like the first bullet goes by, you register what's going on. There's no timeout. There's no, oh, wait, I don't want to do this anymore, right? I mean, that starts in like, you're there. Yeah. Now you're there. Now that's what you're doing. When you look back to the training, from the outsider looking in, so much of it seems physical, right? It's PTs, it's evolutions, it's running, it's hiking, it's pushing your body past physical limits, breaking down those barriers, things you would see in like, the end of a CrossFit workout or so. You can kind of wrap your head around that. Is there any kind of preparation for the psychological, like just brunt that you feel in that? Do they train you at all?
Yeah. That's the moments when you're getting dragged underneath the water for the 20th time while you're in the pool, passing a brick around to a group of other 30 Marines who are trying to do the exact same thing as you are, become the Reconnaissance Marine. It's the time when you haven't slept for 4 or 5 days, and you've had a minimum of 2 to 3 hours of sleep, not even that over that time period. You're rucking over mountainous terrain. That's part of training. You're put into that headspace. It's all of that, right? It's like if you quit in that, I don't want you on the team. I don't want to be next to you.
Yeah.
So already going into that environment, you knew that you weren't going to quit no matter what happened. And the only way that there was going to be a quit in you is if you were to be killed.
When you look back on that, how quickly does the perception of difficulty of what you went through change when you're all of a sudden in the real thing? Like, how nice does it sound to just go do pool evolutions with your friends, when you're like
Yeah.
when you're 5 days into no sleep and you're sleeping in a corner with scorpions and snakes, and you're wearing the same clothes you've been wearing for 50 days. Like, how nice does it sound to go sit in a pool on Coronado and do like breath hold exercise?
Yeah. It brings back a sense of appreciation, to be completely honest.
Yeah.
Right? Like it really does, because it's like, whoa, this is what got me ready to go do that thing. Like,
Yeah.
that's the appreciation I get from it. I got some really great friends, Prime Hall, Don, and Ricky. They created Deep End Fitness and Underwater Torpedo League. We were doing that in the military to build water confidence. We were doing these things to ourselves to get us ready for specific types of missions and things like that. And they brought it into the civilian world, and it's turned into a full-on business to teach others how to get comfortable being underwater and how to manage and cope with stress. Because that's all that is.
That's incredible.
And that's and I'm using an example as that because you can see it being used in a real life world now. And then all of a sudden you apply it to, I'm now in a gunfight and my buddies to the left and right of me are on the wall too, and we're doing work. Boom, 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 boom. Rounds are going off. You're talking to each other, calling up casts, calling out different directions. And you're staying super calm and collective in that whole moment. It's just a flow, right?
Yeah.
That's what that training does for you. That's what the 10,000 rule of going through shoot houses does for you. That's hey, you miss a round in that shoot house, guess where you're going? And a lot of guys know exactly what I'm talking about. You miss a round in a shoot house, there's a penalty for it. Because if you didn't put him down when you made that first point on the gun on target, he potentially can now kill kill your buddy behind you or you. So like,
So crazy.
it's just that
So
headspace. So like,
Yeah.
realistically, you're already being trained to go ahead and have that reaction. Luckily, I came up in a group of individuals where, dude, warlords. You think I'm fucking cool? Like, dude, I know dudes who have put dudes down, who have stories, who have like fought for hours on end and killed over 30 dudes with a sniper rifle. Those are the dudes I was able to learn from, who I still talk to today, who will never sit there and gloat about it. Those are like,
Right.
I was lucky enough to be developed and raised and mentored by legit war fighters, dude. War fighters of our time. You had Ramadi, Fallujah, Baghdad. The list can go on. Afghanistan comes. It's wow. And I'm only say this because I want the world to know the type of men and women that have actually served our country, and some of the 0.001% that has actually done something at that level to protect our country, and who have to still live with that day in and day out.
Yeah, I mean, when hearing you talk about it, that's not to say that there's no psychological toll or difficulty that those people deal with as a result of that protection that they provided, right? Or the time that they spent. 30 people, whether they're the scum of the earth enemy or not, that's something real and very powerful to deal with, no matter who you are. If you're a human, it's something that you have to work through, on your own to some degree,
100%.
and hopefully with the support of community members and other service members that are there for you when you need to talk about stuff that other people just never understand ever, no matter what, because how could they?
It's the same exact question. It's the exact same thing you just asked, right? Into the question you asked of like, how do you create that perception between the two? It's one ends and the new one starts. That's all that happens.
Right.
That's the way I look at it.
What are you doing to yourself, like when you're with these teams? And man, I mean, there's so many things I want to talk about. Before we get to that, I'll do my best to put some structure on this because it's
You
hard,
good,
man.
dude.
Let's take it back to physical training. Let's unpack what are the physical demands that you face as someone preparing to become a reconnaissance Marine versus someone who's just enlisted. And you alluded to it a little bit with like the water evolutions and stuff you're doing, but what are you actually getting yourself ready for as your perception stands when you're there doing it? And then what are the actual physical tasks? What are things that you're doing on a day-to-day basis prior to getting a deployment? Because the reason I ask this is I really think of this stuff from, you're a coach, I'm a coach. We've been athletic and trained athletes before and general population people. And I think a lot about preparedness. What are you getting ready for? What are you conditioning your body to be able to do? Is it take care of your family? Is it go on a hike? And I always look to these specialized military units as what more demanding thing could you actually be preparing for than what you guys prepare for? That is the ultimate physical test. Is can you be in war? That's harder than a CrossFit workout. That's harder than an ultra marathon. That's harder than doing a triathlon or an Ironman or an open water swim because it's unpredictable and it's all the elements. So, what does that structure actually look like when you're in it?
So like I said earlier, like I'm really glad we're able to like dive into this stuff because I haven't done these kinds of conversations in a very long time, and my thought process to a lot of this stuff has changed so much in the way I view the world and how I
love
view
it.
that. I'm no different than the mom who's stepping up to do Fran. I'm no different. Why is that? It takes courage to pick that bar up and do 21 thrusters, 15 thrusters, 9 thrusters with chest to bar pull-ups. It also takes courage to pick up my rifle, put on my helmet, shooter's kit, my ruck, look to the guys to the left and right and be like, you guys ready to rock and roll and step out of friendly lines because we're about to do this again. There's no difference. The stress is very similar. My stress is just here. Their stress is there. It's the same exact thing why I chased specific numbers on a weightlifting bar for so long. Because
Been there, yeah.
Correct. Because it's unpredictable, right? The mom who goes and picks up the barbell for 15 after she just got completed doing unbroken 21 pull-ups. Well, that was unpredictable. What if she didn't think she could do that? Now she has to face the consequences of doing 21 unbroken chest to bar pull-ups when she picks up the 15 reps now for 15 barbell reps of thrusters.
Right.
It's the same thing with me. I step outside of friendly lines. I take the wrong step, or our point man takes us down the wrong direction, or takes us down the right direction, because right and wrong really doesn't really matter. It's just what do you think is the right thing in that moment. It's very unpredictable as well. I don't know. And that's literally what I've learned today, to where like, dude, honestly, man, I don't know what's going to happen in an hour from now. I can predict and be like, hey, we're still having this conversation a little bit further deep down the rabbit hole. Or, hey, my kids are home now and I'm hanging out with them because we ended the podcast because we got done talking early. I don't know. So to answer that question, that's kind of where I'm at with it today. It's where it's just like, man, I've just learned that like I'm no different than, the mom who loses a daughter. That's stressful, going through those kinds of environments. Right? I've seen that firsthand. I see what that does to someone from a turmoil standpoint, suffering. It's the same idea when you watch your buddies get blown up and now they have to work on learning how to live life with no legs.
Right.
It's all very relative. It's all very similar, right? It's just the story's different.
Yeah. What are when you're going through, it's not, obviously it's not BUDS because it's not SEAL training, but there's some sort of PT structure to your pre-deployment, right? As you're going through and becoming a reconnaissance Marine, what's like that? I guess it would be like a macro cycle, right? Like what's the macro cycle of a recon Marine? And what is that first?
So realistically, I mean, I train a lot of guys individually to get ready for selections like this. And one common thing that I've seen from it all, right? It'd be BUDS, because I've gotten guys ready for BUDS. Got one guy in it right now getting ready to graduate. Have another kid right now in recon school getting ready to graduate here in 2 weeks. And the biggest piece that I've seen, and something that I can now tie back to when I reflect my time in, as I was training for these deployments and getting ready for recon school, was the psychological toughness that you need to handle when you are put under the physical fatigue. Knowing that, hey, I just can't, just because I'm struggling to do my 100,000 push-up, it doesn't mean I can quit, right? It's being able to like keep the headspace as strong as possible, you know. And again, that perception that I talked about changes once that bullet flies by your ear, right? Compared to before when it didn't. It's the same idea too when you're not exposed to those things, but you, again, this escalation of force. Maybe that's the theme of understanding escalation of force isn't just from a physical standpoint, it also can be from a psychological standpoint. So the idea would be is like we got to get these individuals through these different gates of psychological stress so that they can handle some of that higher stress. Said principle, right? You know,
Yep.
low stress, high stress, low skill, high skill. I approach it the same exact way as I do for a physical training session as I look at it from a psychological. So, you know, if you would have asked me this when I was in, I probably would have been like, oh, dude, I'm rucking 24/7. I'm in the gym all the time. I'm doing all, yes, I am. I'm training, I'm running, I'm making sure that my body is able to handle it. Even when I'm on deployment, when we come back from these long mission operations or whatever else, like, yes, I'm in the drain training my body. Yes. But realistically, I'm training the body so that I can train the mind.
Right.
That's really what we're
I
doing.
mean, if you're on a mission, let's say if you're on a raid or something like that, I mean, physical demands in the moment are wear all your gear, wear your pack, which is what a total of with your firearm 65, 70 pounds
Depending.
that you have on your body. So, you know, if you're power cleaning 275, you're moving well in excess in that rep of what you're going to need to be able to move right in the moment. But it's that 75 pounds doesn't ever come off you until the mission's over. So that is, I mean, Chinese water torture, right? Like the little dot just going like this on your head, it's not that bad. But when it never stops, it's really bad. It drives you insane. So how do you manage, so much of effective training is managing output, right? So intensity, recovery, and scaling your intensities through your program so that you can either peak and compete, or you can, peak your anaerobic conditioning in the meet or something like that. But again, this nonstop under recovered, no sleep, and then the realness of it that it's constantly, you could constantly take a wrong step, you could constantly look around a wrong corner, whatever. What is that like from a coach's perspective? What does that boil down to for you? What is the trained thing that keeps the team moving physically and mentally, like that combination? It's not like heart rate, right? It's not like you're sitting there and you guys are like, hey, Todd, your HRV is not in the right spot. We can't move until you're like ready. I mean, what do you guys, how are you gauging that in real time?
So I'm going to use another military lingo, and I know we're talking to the masses, so I'll break it down as simple as I can. But we follow this thing called task condition standards, right? And I feel like those three words allow for us to understand there's a task, there's a condition within that task, and there's a standard within completing that task. And that there, from an operator standpoint, from a mission standpoint, from a patrolling standpoint, is how we move through the mission, right? Hey, you're here to do a thing. That is your primary job, nothing else. One, so we relieve as much stress as possible off the individual and just be like, hey, this is all you're doing. This is the environment you're in. Cool. Yep. But from the task standpoint, the task is to protect the guys to the left and right of you. That's the task. I know the mission will have its own task, but like it creates a deeper purpose. You see what I'm doing now? I'm like taking this approach and I'm layering it a little further into the more of the internal person. So it's like, well, I'm here to take care of the guys to the left and right. I mean, if I take care of them, they're going to take care of me. What are the conditions? Right. Well, the conditions are, one, what is my condition internally of how I feel right now while I'm in it, and how do I go ahead and navigate that? Which is why you hear a lot of individuals like, I had to let go of my humanity. I had to like put that to a side to actually get through. So the condition of changing who you are so that you can continue to do it. And the standard is the standard, right? Like you don't quit. You step up to this call. You do the things, the unique things that you're supposed to be doing as an individual. That's the standard, right? You're taking care of those guys. So when it comes to, physical training, and this is something that I feel like, a lot of people ask me this year so far, because I do train Felipe Andrew, which is one of the #1 black belts on the circuit for IBJJF. And one of the biggest things I felt like we improved on was the mental conditioning out of everything. And that was because when we are in it for 30 or 40 minutes, I'm telling you, dude, Felipe Andrew, I've had him do some, we call it Bulletproof Fridays. He comes in scared. Number one black belt in the world comes in and he's like, what is coach going to put me through today?
Yeah.
It's a psychological game. It's no different. I play with the guys that I was getting ready for to go ahead and fight these next generation of wars that's coming up. I put thousands of individuals through for 4 years doing that. It's no different than the way that I train myself.
Yeah, I think so I've always said, like, and I guess it's easier to say this on the other side of it, but getting strong is easy. Like, when you really think about building strength, it's not a complex thing. You have to show up. Essentially, it's really the thing you have to do. You just have to keep coming to the workout and doing it. But there are few training sessions in the road to getting physically stronger, like strength to weight, that involve breaking through really gnarly mental barriers. You find this certainly more on anaerobic conditioning work, like when you're tired and the carbon dioxide is building up your body and you feel really uncomfortable and you have to keep going. But with strength work, most of the time, it's the rests are longer, the work is short, and it's fun the whole time. So if you can get over the soreness, which anyone who's been training for a long time, you learn to like it, that's something that you can just do.
Yeah.
Mental training is very different. And it is the one type of training that exposes who you actually are, separate from who you think you are.
Yeah.
And jiu-jitsu is a really interesting environment for that because, like you said, these guys are black belts, right? Like, they are the pinnacle of the form of martial arts. They're the best, the scariest, the most intense. But most of the time, in big matches, in ADCC and whatever, somebody gives up. Like, to some degree, somebody quits to the other guy that day in that moment. And it's not to say that if they ran it back on another time, it wouldn't happen the same way. It could totally switch. But most times, somebody mentally destroys the other dude. And you know it's happening because they're both so damn good physically and technically. It's the thing that gives. And I can only imagine in those settings, those war theater settings, that psychological part, like, to break down the will of your enemy or the will of the insurgents in the community, that's how you actually win the battle.
Yep.
Right?
You nailed it, dude. That is spot on. And that's what I was getting ready to say was it's the duration of the dripping of the water on the head when you're getting it hour 6. It's the duration of rockets going over your head every 30 minutes. It's the duration of just being shot at every 5 minutes. It's the duration, and then that lasts over 6 hours, 7 hours, right? So bringing it full circle into the idea of, like, oh, well, how did I develop mental conditioning or mental toughness in someone? What I did with Felipe Andrew and some other individuals, and then my individuals who I work with to go into the military special operations world, is no different. It's not. It's not like I'm sitting there and giving them these random tasks. And no, what I'm giving them is an intentional, in the moment present. And when you're in at minute 40, and I told you you can't go over a heart rate of 150, meaning that you're now no longer in an anaerobic state, you're pure aerobic, meaning that you have to go ahead and maintain your heart rate, maintain staying in the workout, but you're 45 minutes in now and you feel bored, or you're now just mentally tired of having to stay on task. That's when I actually can build mental toughness. There's a small little nugget there I just handed out. It's something I don't share with anybody. Leticia, which is Felipe's wife, she's like, don't share the secrets. Because that's a small thing. And it's not a secret. I didn't learn that. I learned that from somebody else who I've seen do it.
So wait,
to
you
me.
actually, you take, let's unpack this. That's really interesting because I've actually not really thought of it this way too, because you think of high intensity in the bout means let's make sure that we hit enough higher intensity variations in your training over the week so that you're prepared for it. But you purposely put a mental gruel on aerobic, so
with oxygen,
lower heart for that individual, right? Like, this would be not about to throw up, not starting to feel like you're going to pop out of your skin. This is very manageable work, especially for an elite athlete. But you push that manageable work out for a really long time to purposely create boredom within their session so that they have to work through that.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's actually a really interesting mental tactic. How did
Psychological
they
warfare.
respond to that?
Psychological
Totally.
warfare.
How do they respond?
Fine to it. In the moment, it's miserable, but when they get done, they walk out of there not broken, not beat up,
Right.
mentally exhausted. And now sometimes they either trained jiu-jitsu either already or they haven't trained it yet at all. So I just dug a hole for them to when they go spar now, they have to learn how to fight from that deficit because of the fact what I had just done to them before.
Right. That's really interesting. Would you say you pull that from military experience, or where did that idea develop?
I pull it from a few different teachers. One of the teachers is obviously the military, going through special operations school, and then as well as being an instructor at the schoolhouse. So the external teacher was being an instructor. The second teacher would be, there are a couple of teachers. It's Mark Twight and Michael Blevins at a nonprofit. And
Okay.
what they do a lot of the times when I started kind of learning what they did was they utilize more of the psychological piece in training sessions to go ahead and open it up to make changes because they've worked with
Interesting.
movie actors. So have you ever heard of Mark Twight,
Yep.
Jim Jones, and those guys? He no longer owns. He created
Jim Jones, like out of
Salt Lake City.
what's
It
that
used to
place?
be
the
so-
300. They trained
yes.
the 300 guys.
Yes, that's Mark Twight.
Maximus, Bobby Maximus.
But that's not who owned it. This is I'm going. You're about to get a history lesson right now. The
Yeah,
owner
let's
and
go.
creator of Jim Jones in 2006, 2007 was Mark Twight. He is the one
Gotcha.
that actually trained the 300 movie actors. That is the truth. Truth. Everything from there is his. Yep, go for it.
Was Bobby his protege to some degree?
I don't believe so.
No, not at all.
I don't believe so. Not the way
You know who Bobby?
Yeah, I know who he is.
But you
Yeah.
know who I'm talking about.
100%,
Okay,
yeah.
okay. I just want to make sure I got the characters right.
Yep. Nope. So over time,
Interesting.
So over time, Jim Jones blew up. Mark Twight pulled himself out of it, moved on, sold it to Lisa and all of them.
Yep.
They now run it. End of story. It's not my story to share. But,
Fair. Respect
But
that.
Mark Twight and Michael Blevins, what they were doing with actors was this approach of psychological conditioning so that they could get them to actually peak in those scenes when they needed to get their bodies in the physical conditioning that they needed to. Again, the mental conditioning led to the physical conditioning, led to the physical appearance. That's
really
did.
interesting.
I started seeing him apply it to endurance athletes, shooters, all different types of people. I got to witness it firsthand and be a part of it for multiple years and get really close with them to learn how they approached it. And that's what I ended up learning from them was how do I go ahead and take this thing? And then the endurance world. The endurance world was another teacher for me. And that's long duration time periods I found moving over 100 miles for through the mountains for 30 hours plus. That duration of time, what it taught me was like, oh, wow, this is enduring. We are literally enduring. I'm learning that endurance is love. I had to learn to love myself. So this goes so much far deeper now into just building mental endurance, mental conditioning, mental toughness, mental flexibility. I can give you so many different labels on how we look at this, but it brought it all back. So those three external teachers, motivators, mentors, right, really helped me understand how to apply that. And then my time as a full-time weightlifter, dude, man, I've weightlifted pretty competitively, I feel like, early on in the days.
I always like talking with people about Olympic weightlifting because of the style of lifting and what it takes to get proficient. And I don't mean the initial improvements in strength that you get just from the fact that you're taking on something new. Like if you've never done clean before and you start to learn the mechanics of a clean and your squat's at 185 pounds, at some point you're going to clean a pretty substantial amount of weight and it's going to feel great. 5 years later, 6 years later, 8 years later, you're fighting for kilos. I mean, you're working around the clock constantly under stress to gain an extra 2.2 pounds in a year on some of your lifts in the best setting, in the performance that you aim for. So it's a specific type of person that develops a knack for that style of lifting over powerlifting, over functional fitness, over CrossFit, where you're really pursuing this grueling, enduring version of strength training. How did you find Olympic lifting, and what was it about that that made you go, I got to learn more about this?
Dude, so weightlifting for me started back when I got back from Afghanistan in 2011. I started going over to a CrossFit gym called Offshore CrossFit. It was ran by a guy named Joe Linton and Jason Lavoie. And Jason Lavoie actually had been weightlifting his whole, I think, middle school and high school career under Coach Bergner. So Coach Bergner used to coach as weightlifting coach down at Rancho Bernardo High School. And he had a lot of students there. He used to have guys go up, ladies go up to his gym and train out there, and Jason was one of them. And I started, getting into weightlifting because of CrossFit, honestly, at that time period. I started learning how to clean. I started learning how to snatch. And honestly, I kind of just really fell in love with the movement, like the art of it. I've always been an artist. I love painting. I love drawing. I love playing music, even though I don't play it as much as I should be. It's just all of those things. And, when I saw the movement of a snatch taking, the bar from the floor all the way to over your head in this beautiful, expression of strength and power and flexibility, you name it and everything. I was like, man, that's really cool. Yeah. And I kind of just started like really just watching it being coached to other people. And that was Jason. I used to just sit there and watch him coach weightlifting. I mean, just never said a thing, just watched him coach. And I started getting into it more. Just like you said, like, hey, your strength is, front squatting 225 for a double. And then all of a sudden you can only clean 155. But there's a point where, you be as technically as sound as possible, but if if you're not strong, you're not going to be lifting heavy weight. And I got to learn that through a couple of coaches that I worked under named Caleb Williams and Kelly Williams. And Caleb Williams used to be, I think, the 74 kilo senior clean and jerk world record for a while back in like 2012 or some time period like that. But he also was a big time power lifter. He came from the powerlifting world. And, little short, stocky guy out of Georgia, just massive squat at the world, deadlift at the world, But you watch him clean and jerk. It was just this fast, explosive movement, heavy load, and he could front squat 400 cold any day of this, I don't know about now. You really want to lift heavier weights in the snatch and the clean and jerk. But as well as we needed to be able to move really well, we needed to have explosiveness, we needed to be powerful. We needed to not only just be strong from an absolute standpoint, but we had to be, the term people use is strength and speed together had to be very, very high, meaning that I could snatch, if I'm snatching 90% of my clean and jerk, there's a little bit of inefficiency there, right? Like the clean and jerk should be a little bit higher because we look at the 80, 85. But I knew like once we started balancing those numbers out, we start seeing numbers go up. And, I'm all over the place with this because of the fact that like when I look at it could be ultra running, it could be playing golf, it could be any of those types of endeavors, but the goal is to be able to do everything else around it really well to amplify it. What I learned being a weightlifter was that for me to amplify the snatch and the clean and jerk, I had to get stronger, I had to be more mobile, I had to sleep better, I had to recover, I had to eat more calories, because you're right, it's simple, repetitive, and boring.
It's the type of person that likes that boring. I appreciate that. You're willing to. It's almost not like a. This is so deep for like a conversation on weightlifting, but it's not like masochistic, but it's most of the time. If you graft all your time as a weightlifter, and you looked at the percentage of that graft time that you're spending performing the best version of that lift, it's like 0.05%. 99.0 whatever percent is spent doing sub maximal, not the most you can do, focusing on technique, focusing on small adjustments, and that's a mind game. It's a mind game, totally. You have to show up 40 minutes sometimes before your session because your body's banged up in the 12th week of your cycle and really get yourself ready to go. Then you got to do all your bar reps, which when you look in a gym, people don't do bar reps, right? They put 25s on the bar and they start squatting. Olympic weightlifters learn to respect that you start with the bar because the bar primes the mechanics. The mechanics prime the movement. The movement allows you to do the lift, and then the lift allows you to later move more weight. So it's like this accepting of the process that you have to be part of that's super unique to it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I look at priming the barbell movement with a snatch and clean and jerk just as much as I look at priming my system to get ready to go for a long run. And something I learned from the endurance world that I apply now to today in terms of training is, you know, in weightlifting, a lot of high-level coaches count reps over a macro cycle, right? Like you can talk to someone like, oh yeah, volume of reps, right? Like, hey, for example,
Like, your volume.
I know he counts a lot of his athletes' reps to go ahead and see some of those things, especially uses velocity-based training. And it's like, I think it's great and it's awesome, but what I learned from the endurance, I need to build that mental and physical fatigue on the body. Well, let's go ahead and take those hours of training and apply it to a professional weightlifter. How many hours are they training a week? About similar. But you got to think about it, right? Like they're in the gym. I mean, 12 hours a week, dude, is 3 hours a day of training. 3 times 4. That's all that is. If you think about it, that's not very much. So if a weightlifter is training, you know, 6 days a week, 2 to 3 hours a day for that, they're hitting that total number of training volume. So you are hitting all of those little tiny pieces within that training block. And I found that the more that you spend at those higher hours of training is where we really do develop that, you know, the attention to detail, because you can't just snatch and clean and jerk heavy 12 hours a week. There's no way.
No, your body can't handle it. Yeah, you can't recover fast enough. Oh, George, can you pull the headphones out of the plug there? Yeah, it teaches you. I had been an athlete my whole life. I had trained so many different modalities. Jiu Jitsu and weightlifting taught me more about how to take care of myself than anything else I'd ever done, for sure. Because they're two things that you cannot continue 100%. To perform them if you neglect your body. And you see this in any academy you ever go to, because what are people dealing with? Neck injuries, hamstring injuries, knee injuries, ankle injuries, but they just keep training until they hit the wall and then they quit. You have to respect it. Like, you have to actually actively carve time out of your week that you will dedicate towards not dialing it up, but actually dialing it down. And that's a hard thing to do when you're someone who gets enjoyment and a good feeling out of exertion. When you like exertion, when you like to grind through it, it's hard. It's a discipline in and of itself.
Man, I'm
to
glad
learn
you
how to
bring this
take care of
up,
yourself.
because this is something that I am doing myself right now, especially through my jiu-jitsu journey. And I have to thank endurance and all my previous youth hours of training, of thinking that I can go hard in the paint 24/7. It's just not doable anymore, especially at 35 for me. And realistically, man, like, I just can't do jiu-jitsu 7 days a week. Like, I just get bored with it. I'm not going to lie to you. I literally said that. If I do jiu-jitsu 7 days a week, I get bored and burnt out. I've just learned that. That's just who I am. It's the same thing with if I run for 7 days a week, I get burnt out if I do that consistently. It's the same thing with anything we do. So I've learned to really have this, again, this artist and martial arts mindset of, like, I can integrate all these different things to allow for me to be consistent in the things I love doing. Except that it's an ego thing.
Totally. It's a hard part to go, because here's what you do. You spend your whole life, and you much more than me, because of the theater with which you've tested all of this stuff, right? You build yourself up. That's what your life does. It builds up your capabilities, what you think you can do, the things that you've pushed yourself through mentally, you've overcome, adversity, yada, yada, yada. And then you get to this point where you're like, wait, but that's not like an endless cycle that you can push through. There has to be something where, yes, maybe at the tip of the spear when you're defending the country, you
100%.
override that system, right? You go, you know what? I'm not going to sleep for 6 days, and we got tons of ammo, and we're going to handle this situation. Okay, that's the time when you do that. That time, but when you're back here or when you're going through life, you have to regulate to get the most out of what you can do. Otherwise, you force yourself into a wall all the time.
Well, it goes back to what I said, this escalation of force.
Totally.
It's literally for example, what jiu-jitsu taught me, to answer your question finally, is that I don't have to go into a jiu-jitsu sparring session or a class and thinking that I have to go at 100% the whole time. I am in control of my level of force I apply for that day. And I've learned to do that, and it's allowed me to actually enjoy jiu-jitsu in a way that I'm just moving. It's a movement flow session for me for the day. It's allowing me to express the way I move. I love movement play. I just love it. But jiu-jitsu for me now means I get to play that movement around somebody's body.
Right.
And there's going to be some days where the person's better than me and they're going to beat me, obviously, right? More time on the mat, more hours spent, the higher ranking belt. I expect to outsmart me, to outskill me, and all those things because of the time on that. But at the same time, I'm still going to move with you very well and very clear and very efficient because I understand the escalation of force that I need to apply in those moments.
When you're at training, what feels applicable to the time that you spent in the fort? Like, I feel like there's often times we're doing things in jiu-jitsu under the guise of like self-defense or de-escalation, and I'm like, I talk to other guys that are like former MARSOC dudes or special forces operators that I have the pleasure of training with, and they're like, look, you go into a room and some guy advances on you over there, you go 3-on-1. Someone takes the legs, someone takes the upper body, someone takes the upper body again. That's what you do. There's none of this, I'm not grabbing the collar, I'm not grabbing the sleeve. There's zero error margin. It's 2-on-1, 3-on-1 every single time, no matter what, to the ground, finish the job. And I'm like, damn, here we are playing like, patty cakes in our pajamas, and everyone thinks that they're becoming super capable out in the world. Every day that I train jiu-jitsu makes me want to get in an altercation less and less and less and less and less. How much of it actually transfers to something like that? You go on a raid into a unit and there's someone there and you're hand to hand, face to face. What is that like?
I had a conversation with a mentor of mine. He spent 20 years in the military. And we were actually talking about the idea of violence, what real violence is, and how to actually accept it and actually to not walk away from it, but to approach it when you need to. And that's the difference is, what you just expressed was that part of violence was needed to de-escalate and get rid of the threat, right? And that's the same headspace in a real fight. My way to de-escalate a threat is by walking away. It's not by going and killing it. It's not by going and killing that thing that's a threat. It's to get away as fast as possible. But if I am unable to get away, I have the skill set and the reaction and the mental fortitude to de-escalate the threat by hand.
Right.
That's the way I look at that. So it's understanding violence.
There's a book about that just got written by this guy, and I'm totally butchering this dude in Oregon. He's a black belt, and he just wrote a book called, I think it's called Understanding Violence or something like that. But it's about all this. It's about that, painting that picture for yourself. And it's funny, there's a bravado that's definitely tagged on to martial arts, I think, especially now with the growth of the sports and ADCC and the UFC and ONE, and just like there's so much more present. You don't have to be like this fringe fight fan to be exposed to fight sports. Whereas in the past, like if you weren't, boxing was mainstream and you had Muhammad Ali and Roberto Duran and George Foreman and all these guys that were like big stars, but it was still fringe sport compared to football compared to baseball, basketball, and fight sports is really pushing into the mainstream, right? And as a result, it's exciting. You can get involved at a younger age. You can learn to defend yourself, to stick up for yourself. It's all available now. Uh, but with that, there is this like there's a smugness that is apparent sometimes in the it's like the I think in the past martial arts dissolved the ego. Martial arts was this thing that dissolved it, and now you're seeing that in some cases it's actually enriching it. And it makes sense. Why? Because as an athlete, ego can be a good thing. It can be a driver. If you don't want to beat the guy next to you and you're an athlete, that's not good, right? Because you're not going to show up and train hard enough to overcome that. So ego can be valuable, but you're seeing it like tilt the scale a little bit in the martial arts world. And every time I talk to someone like yourself, it is so grounding and so humbling to just be reminded that there are people out there who have put their life on the line literally and actually understand on a personal level and a collective level what this shit really is about.
Yeah.
And it is different and it's real and it's not what we're talking about in the academies.
I tell you this, dude. I tell you this. You said it multiple times in your sentence. Is this right here?
Yeah.
It's a sport. You need egos in a sport.
Yeah.
You need it. You need it. If we want, and I dude, I'm going to tell you this right now. I want the egos in the sport to grow the sport. I 100% do.
Yeah.
The Gordon Ryans, the Nick Melegali's, the Victor Hugo's, you see him making his own brand now. Why?
Yeah.
Because it puts money in their pockets. And if
Totally.
we can go ahead and get people to do that, but you're right, when it comes to the sport of jiu-jitsu and then the change of actually someone who enjoys the sport of jiu-jitsu but trains for life, there
Yeah.
needs to be that conversation of understanding violence and understanding that
Yes.
violence isn't a sport. War is not a sport.
Yeah.
Jiu-jitsu is a sport when you compete. And yes, is it very dangerous? And yes, do you ride that line? Yes. But that line's, the letters in that line are not ABC like they are for war. They're DEFG, which mean they're different. And
Yeah.
that's where we need to go ahead and highlight that is, yeah, you're right. Realistically, just because I'm being trained to go ahead and fight somebody, like in jiu-jitsu, doesn't mean that I should go and fight someone out in fucking real life. Because you're going to learn
Not at
really
all.
quick. You're going to learn really fast. And to be honest, some of that shit doesn't work.
Yeah.
Some of it doesn't
I know.
work.
It's very early on at Gracie, one of our former professors, a former Bellator fighter, and it was just so fun to talk to him about the stuff we do. And I liked when he led class because a lot of times he would use applicable kind of like, I guess more mixed martial arts like MMA style jiu-jitsu, which I would love to see more of actually in a lot of schools. But it was cool because then you would see how he looks at real life situations, how he assesses them, and it is different. It is. I don't want to be on my back grabbing onto your I love jujitsu. I love jujitsu. I have a podcast where I talk about jujitsu the majority of the time. Right, I'm like a fan. Right, this is good for me. But I can see the forest for the trees, and I know that if you're in a road rage altercation, right, the last thing I'm doing is slapping your hand and lying down on my back and putting my legs in the air.
No, it's
never.
Never. No, it's no. Like that's like. So the interesting part about that, right, is like I really like the fact that you utilize MMA because that is actually as close as we can get to what war kind of looks like or what it would feel like.
Right.
And I know you're like bullets, but I'm talking about the weapon is your fist. The weapon is your knee.
Yeah.
The weapon is your elbow. The weapon is the foot. The weapon is the leg. And when we go ahead and get in real life altercations, if we don't respect those weapons, what do they do to us? They can kill us. It's the same idea when we go and look at, for example, remember when Nate Diaz put that one dude in a headlock straight off the bat? Because he respected his weapons.
Yeah.
He respected his weapons, brother. You're telling me for 100% Nate Diaz could have won to the dude, but guess what? That dude is not conditioned enough to handle a blow to the face by a pro MMA fighter. Because guess what would have happened to that kid?
He would have fall back and hit his head, and who knows what, right? And that's what Nate Diaz didn't want to do. He wanted to manage the violence of it.
escalation of force.
Yeah.
And
You know, it's funny when you talk to people who've seen that clip that don't train any kind of martial arts, or someone who's seeing it kind of in passing, it can look barbaric. They're like, "Oh my God, that guy," like. But we all know what happened. Nate Diaz saved that dude's life, and Nate Diaz controlled that situation to the nth degree, and he set the guy down gently on Bourbon Street. Show me how many other people that got in an altercation that week were gently set down on the ground. Like
100%.
that's the difference.
That is the
He
difference of
understood it.
understanding violence at its highest capability. One thing we got taught in the Marine Corps was like never get in fights in the public because your hands are now considered lethal weapons. We got told that. That, hey, but how many fights did Marines get into all the time in the fucking in civilian world? All the time. Yeah. I'm a byproduct of it. I used to get in a lot of fights all the time. Yeah. Because why? Because we were learning how to develop this escalation of force, where in the Marine Corps, it was 0 to 100, killed or be killed.
Right.
Going to answer your question when it first started was, it's retaught me how to escalate force and violence, and we're able to apply it now. It's literally what Jiu Jitsu has taught me.
When you were deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan, how common is it that you come hand to hand?
In my time, dude, it was very, very uncommon. And if that happened, things were not good. Like if you got,
I was gonna say, like that's bad.
That's real bad. Like,
can you pull that mic out? Yeah, just like you could unplug it or just hold it out like that. It's perfect. Yeah, that seems like the worst. It's something you want to know how to do, but that couldn't be a worse situation, right? That shows loss of control, right?
Yeah. So the idea is this, and I'm pretty sure I can. I'm not going to speak for everyone, but those like in Iraq during Fallujah, Ramadi, Baghdad, some of those big battles where they were going building to building, some of them got into hand-to-hand combat. Right? Because the insurgents in the room, you're being attacked, or the insurgent doesn't have a weapon, but they have a knife or a machete coming at you. You're fucking muzzle thumping the dude, butt stalking him, and taking him down and potentially getting to your knife to cut his throat. I'm not lying. Like that is legitimately a sequence that we have been taught if someone's running at you with a knife in an open room. Fucking boom, boom, and get to your weapon as quick as possible. Or putting two in the dude's chest.
Yeah.
So
well, you don't. How do you think in that? I guess you don't, right? You operate.
I just asked the same question to an athlete that I'm working with. He is a part of a SWAT unit that he was involved in a shooting in a state. I'm not going to say the state. Whatever. Keep it professional.
No, that's fine. Yeah.
And he had a gun pulled on him while he was in his vehicle, 20 yards away. Think about that. You're in your vehicle. Someone's like, hey, dude, there's a gun being pointed at you. You look over. Guess what his first reactions were? The car was already on, so just know that. The truck was already on. Yeah. He fucking hit the brake, pulled it into drive, sped off. Within 10 seconds, he was out of his vehicle, and 2 rounds were into the dude's chest. Like that. And I asked him, I was like, what made you react so quick? Because it was his first time ever getting into a shooting altercation, especially in the civilian side of the house. And he was like, dude, to survive. I wasn't ready to die that day.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack, man. That's
within split seconds, dude. He was skidded out, and luckily, the dude had no rounds in that weapon. He wanted to be shot by the police to take him out, so he was just using that. But he didn't know that until after he shot the dude.
Right.
But in split seconds, foot on the pedal, drive, jumped out, 2 to the chest, out of his side. Think about that. All of those movements out of a vehicle, behind a car, behind that vehicle door, 2 to the dude, right away. Think about that. And his first round missed.
Right. It's all training. Everything's training.
It is.
Yeah.
It
I mean,
truly
you look
is.
at, you drive, whenever I drive up to LA, I see the little CQB houses and the little shoot houses and stuff that they train with that are right off the road there. And I'm like, occasionally I'll see units actually training. And you're like, wow, you would just hope that they're training every single second, every single second, so that in the event that you have to do anything, you're not thinking about it. It's like, think of how clunky jiu-jitsu is when you start, right? Because you're thinking about every move you're doing. You're like, am I supposed to grab the lapel? Should I grab the sleeve? Should I wait? Scissor sweep is if I undo guard. And if you're operating that, it's like learning a language. Like when I learned to speak, like I studied Spanish in college. When I learned to speak it, you think about the conjugation in your head and then you say the word. You think about the number, then you do the numbers in your head and you say the word. And there's that lag time. And the problem is that real life situations don't account for lag time because you can't when it's high risk. And so if it's not intuitive, if it's not flow, like you said, you have no control over what's going to happen. But the better you get, the more that you train, it becomes like you got the lapel and the sleeve and you didn't even think about getting either of them. It just happens.
Yep. Yeah.
How do you go through the world, the civilian world, after being in places like Iraq and Afghanistan on, like you said, part of this 5% of people who actually enlist and deploy, and then when they deploy to an active, live, real war? What is being home like? How do you go through the world? How does this feel on a 24-hour cycle compared to that?
That's so going back to when I was transitioning out of the military, I was lost. And the reason why I say that was because I didn't know how to talk with people with the lens in which I saw the world in. Right?
Yeah.
I told the wife this the other day. I was like, I always have a plan to go ahead and defend myself whenever I walk into a room. And she was like, what?
But that's real. That's real. Like, every time you go into a room, you're like, exit. I'm not sitting there. I won't sit there. I have to face this. That's real every single time.
To take it even further, who's the most dangerous threat in here?
That's so wild. Every time.
Most of the time, yeah, 100%. My wife will tell you the same thing.
So impressive.
Like, and it's just by nature. It just happens. Even if I'm in a friendly area, even when I walk into a dojo to do jiu-jitsu, I look for who the most dangerous person is in that room. And you know what? Usually it's never the black belt.
Yeah.
Never.
It's the 225-pound white belt collegiate D1 wrestler who just came from like the construction job, right?
Not even him.
Who is it?
It doesn't even matter what belt. It is the individual who is having a rough time outside of the dojo, who is using the dojo to express their violence on others because it makes them feel better.
Wow. I never would have. Yeah. Wow, that's a trip. I wouldn't have considered that at all. So so you read, I wonder if do you think that that's from the style of military that you were part of? Like being in reconnaissance, so much of that is high EQ. Like you have to be able to read people and situations without being able to communicate with either of those two things to get information back to decision makers, right?
Yep. Psychological first aid is what I call it today.
Well said. Yeah. Wow. So you walk into a room, you're in a restaurant with your family. What's like a sign that you would pick up? How without having the ability to talk to someone, how do you pick up on that kind of thing that like, all right, I'm going to keep an eye on that person?
I first look for the first individual that's by themselves in there. So who's in there by
like
themselves?
Not by themselves waiting, by themselves.
Correct.
Yeah.
By themselves, just sitting by themselves. Okay, cool. First. All right, sweet. Second, I look for groups of two. All right, what do those groups of two look like? What are they doing? How are they talking? Are they presenting themselves some way? How's their body language? Right? Just like similar stuff like that. That's the way. Who's the most quiet in the room when there's a group of conversation? Why isn't that person communicating with us? Why are they in the back corner just hanging out doing their own thing?
So these are just like a constant slew of outliers in a way. You're just looking for, in any situation, the outlier. So you're on patrol.
Yep.
You guys pull up into a new city or a new village, and you're looking for outliers in the social setting.
What's the anomaly within the baseline?
Yeah.
The baseline
Is
is
that
the
not,
200.
is that stressful, man? Like, is that stressful to go through? I hear that and I'm like, all right, on one side of this, that's like, it sounds like paranoia, even though I know it's not. Right? On the other side of it is like, wow, what if one time in the rest of your life that saves you, your family member, or someone else who happens to be there? What if, right? Then every single day the paranoia was worth it, and you would have doubled down on the paranoia, and kept it every single day, right? It's that one instance that it's happened. It's like keeping. I don't own firearms, but people that do, it's you hope it never happens. But in the one time that it does, if someone does break into your house, you don't want to be looking for something to defend yourself, right? But is there a psychological toll to that constant assessment of danger, constant assessment of violence, or the potential for it, or the environment for it? Do you feel like that at all?
I don't know, I write a lot. So I've said this in plenty of my writings lately, is I feel like sometimes I'm on a psychotic break because the paranoia sometimes plays a game with me. Sometimes, like, I meet new people. I'm like, why are they coming
Yeah.
into my life for? Like, what are they trying to, what intel are
Yeah.
they collecting? Like, that's the game sometimes. Sometimes I just got to shut it off. And there's other times where, like, I have to prepare myself walking into a big group of people. I have to prepare myself to do all these things. So it's, again, if you're noticing, I try to be very aware of my present. I'm trying to be very aware of my actions. Something I've really taken, question you asked, like, what have you learned from the military that you apply today? It's being in that present moment. What did you and your guys do when you guys are going on patrol and having to stay a hard target? It was doing all of the small little things very well. And that's actually what high speed is, right? The fundamentals are the fundamentals. But dominating the fundamentals is what really high speed is. And that's something that I feel like even today I've relied back to. I just learned that that's just part of what keeps me in that mode of being safe and letting me be aware of my areas, because it helped me in deployment. It helped me in a time where life and death would at its highest, and it's going to help me even when the escalation or the environment is different.
Yeah.
It's just recognizing the environments in which I walk into and I surround myself into.
I mean, I think that this stuff's really important because I don't know. I don't hear conversations about this stuff that often, to be honest. And there have to be other people dealing with the same exact thing. Who
It's
have put their life on the line, come back, and from Master Chiefs that I've had on the show to former Rangers, yourself, it's so common. Like, there's such common experiences, and there for everyone who speaks about this as you do, as openly and as aware, or as some of the other guests have. There was a point when they didn't. There was a point where they were really scared to talk about stuff, or they didn't know how to communicate, and it would present itself in public or in a stressful situation or a family gathering or whatever. And it was like this, where do I reach? Who do I talk to? What's going on? And they felt so isolated. And then you realize that, like, it's super normal. It's super normal to feel that way after you go through something so traumatic where you are on to a degree that most people will never understand. And you're constantly on all the time until you come back. And then the expectation is that you just turn that light switch off. Like, that's unrealistic.
No. So it's literally learning how to bridge those experiences and those skills and those lessons to apply them to civilian world today, meaning that the skills that you learned in the combat zone, the skills you learned as an infantryman, the skills you learned as an admin clerk, the skills you learned as a combat medic, whatever skills you learned in your MOS, military operations specialty, all have the skills to be transferred over into civilian life today to actually utilize them. Right? Like, that is the conversation, and something I've called, I call it universal language. And Mark Twight actually did a conversation with me about this, because we did a podcast on endurance, and we called it Endurance is Love. And I was utilizing some different type of language in terms of the guest or the audience we were speaking to. And he came to me afterwards and he was like, hey, dude, I know you have all this experience in these stories. He's like, but you need to learn how to change your color cup to the group of people you're talking to. So if your cup is purple and their cup is red, you need to turn your cup red. You don't need to make their cup purple. And that's something that I've learned to do. And I took that concept and I've applied it to this universal language of skill sets. I need to be able to take my purple cup of skills and apply it to an environment that's red, meaning that they need to be some way, some shape or form applied in that manner. And then from there, we move on to the next environment. What does an octopus do?
Well, they're crazy, man. I mean, they change colors, they disappear, they
100%. 100%. I view myself as an octopus as a human being. When I walk into someone's, like if I walk into a certain environment, I'm going to go ahead and mold and become that so that I can survive within it. I'm going to go ahead and walk into another, I'm going to mold into that to survive and be a part of it. So the idea is learning how to be able to flex between environments to, one, still be who you are, but also respect the environment that you're in. And I think, again, being in a war zone, it taught me to respect that environment because everything out there was trying to fucking kill you. Excuse my language, but it was true. It was like,
yeah, it's real.
It's true. So it's the same thing today. I look at it and it's like, all right, cool. I got to learn this universal language of skill sets that apply to what I'm doing today, right? Like it's the reason why I went to school to get a bachelor's in sports psychology, emphasize on performance psychology. Now I'm getting my master's in English, emphasize on higher education to adults.
Yeah.
Like,
it's a constant pursuance of excellence.
yeah, but it's also being able to get all these skills, right? And then I'm learning to apply them today and then share and showcase that to those who are also coming into this time period and this transition into civilian world from the military or law enforcement or firefighting or whatever it is. The idea is to be able to recognize the skill sets that kept you alive and gave you the things that you are today that are positive and transition them over into the other world. And then learn how to do that in everything you do.
Is there any like feelings of remorse or like regret coming back from time in battle?
For the longest time, I thought I carried remorse. I thought I carried this regret. But at the end of the day, it was actually what I was meant to do. It was the reason why I was put onto this earth, was to go and be in that environment and do that thing. So I couldn't look at it from a remorse or regret standpoint or however we want to frame it. Yeah. I had to start self-endorsing that I really did live in that time period. That's what I did, and accept it. And once I started to accept what the things that I did, it allowed me to look at the things I did in a way different lens or a way different perspective or perception, however you want to look at it. For me, it's not the fact that I got to kill people, I got to be on patrols with friends, I got to do all these things. For me, it's the fact that I was viewed as exactly as the enemy, as the Taliban was viewed to us. Mm-hmm. When I'm trying to be the best human being on this planet as possible. So how does that make me a better human by me going into someone else's country, knocking on their door at nighttime, sending, all those things? How does that make me better? Right. That's the conflict. Because everyone wants to congratulate us, be like, oh, you did a good job protecting our country, doing this. Like, but how am I no different than the Taliban? How am I no different?
So that's the thing that I always, it like stops me in my tracks whenever I see there's a conflict of any kind. I mean, let it just be said that there are forms of evil on this earth presently that's 100%. What they are. That's 100%. Just what they are. Like 100%. if you are willing in the name of anything to put a suicide vest on a child and send it into a group of people and convince that child that they should detonate it, if 100%. That's what you're willing to do, that is evil in realization. There is no form worse than that. So that just needs to be said. In that same context, when there's a conflict, both sides feel righteous. And that's it's just like an interesting thing about it to me, that on either side of it, they feel the exact same towards the other side. So you go on a raid with your team to gain reconnaissance and you run into the enemy, you know that they've put vests on kids. Do you need any more convincing than that? Probably not, right? And they look at you as the worst representation of human culture in existence, right? Like that clash of ideas, it's just like profound.
It's as simple as this. It becomes personal.
Yeah.
It becomes personal because that same person, that same enemy who put a vest on the kid or gave the kid a machine gun with all the dingles and gadgets that run all over it and had him run across the open field and we had to open fire on him with a 240 machine gun fire, right? Because he's a threat now, right? That's a thing. 4-year-old, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old kid running across open danger field with the machine gun. That's real life, right?
Yeah.
Because they believe that we're a certain thing. It's personal to them. It's no different than them taking out one of our guys who steps on an IED or gets shot in the head. It now becomes personal. Right. So now, guess what? Hey, you know how it is. Everyone thinks takes personal. It can get really ugly.
Do you think that there's I guess let me rephrase that. What are your thoughts on peace?
You need peace and you need evil. You need suffering and you need happiness. You need sun. You need the dark. I'm learning to become a storyteller, and one thing I'm learning is contrast, and that contrast is what makes life so rich. So we need peace as much as we need evil or turmoil, and we need vice versa. It's just the way it is. You ever watch a movie? What happens? There's a contrast every single time because it keeps you brought in. That's what life is. So when you ask me, I think yeah,
whenever I say like thank you for your service, I really mean it, and I think underneath that, what I'm really saying is, it's like an acknowledgement that I wasn't willing psychologically, morally, to go do what you did. You know, and that's like, I think that's what it comes down to. You take on and wear something that millions of us will never wear. Don't have to. You know, I get to wake up and just go about my day, do my things, and go train Jiu Jitsu and work out and live a sweet life. And I never have to see a blown up child. I never have to watch my friend blow up in front of me. You know, there's so many things that I don't have to do, and I can know that seeing a world where I would agree. There's the yin and the yang it's constant. It's always been there, and I think it's just the nature of our species. It'll always be there. And there's some people that wear that, and there's some that don't. And they're like, you have to have an appreciation for that on some level, I think.
Yeah. And that's kind of, honestly, man, like at the point of where I'm at today, dude, I've just learned to appreciate everything that I've like been through up to this point, right? Like we didn't even talk about my childhood. Like the reason why I joined the Marine Corps was to get out of my childhood. I was from the age of 14 till I joined the Marine Corps, I was a crackhead weighing 150 pounds, dude. Like I got out of my hometown to go to save me from, from potentially jail or overdose. My rehab was the Marine Corps. And my gift of rehab to get clean was to go fight this country's war. Our war.
Yeah. It's a hell of a rehab facility.
100%. 100%, dude. Like, it's not a lie. Like, you're right. Yeah. But I'm not alone in that. I'm not unique. And I've learned that. Yeah. Right? Like, we all, like, so, like, when you say, like, well, how do we get through these types of things? It's learning to accept the contrast of both ends of life and death. Yeah. If we can accept both of them and understand, like, can we be fearful of these things? Sure, but we have to respect it. It's the same thing with violence. It's the same thing with escalation of force. We have to respect escalation of force, no matter what it is we do, no matter what you do, right? It's being a parent, right? Like, if you spank your kid too hard, there's a certain level there, right?
Yeah.
If you yell too loud, there's an escalation of force there. If you don't say anything at all, there's an escalation of force there. Silence is just as worse or just as bad as the opposite of that, which is pure loudness.
Yeah, it's that balance. It's the balance.
And
well, I mean, we
Yeah,
didn't
dude.
even get to touch on, in all honesty, too many things, which is, it's good and bad. It's bad because we didn't get to cover it in the episode. It's good because it gives us something to talk about in the future when we do this again. But I want to be respectful of your time, George, and say thank you, one, for your service, as I mean it, and thank you for taking the time to come on here and be transparent about some pretty difficult topics. Because I think it's with that transparency that this stuff, it reaches the right ears. You know, maybe it doesn't reach billions of ears, but it reaches the right ones, and I think it has the power to actually have a real impact on people's lives. So I really appreciate you willing to talk about it, man.
Yeah, man. No, you're welcome, dude. I appreciate you inviting me on. And again, like I said, thanks to Casey for connecting us, and I appreciate that, dude, 100%.
Yes.
He's seen my journey since, 2011, 12. He's seen me come up over the years. So I appreciate him being a great teacher and a mentor as well. And one thing I do want to leave off on, because I really like the fact that you said that the whole tears thing was the
Yeah.
idea that, or not, but the ears, I'm sorry, the ears of like the ears
Yep.
it gets into. Even if this just goes to one person, that one person just needs to share it with another person. And it goes back to
Yeah.
the whole, leads to 10 people, and that 10 people go for it. And at the end of the day, right, like most people that hear this stuff won't believe it because it's just not something they've seen before or they've heard in their reality or they're not open to. And then we have another group of audience who will accept it and be like, fuck, dude, that's, yeah. There's going to be the in-between, you know? But at the end of the day, though, man, like realistically, dude, like I really believe conversations do create change. And that's one
They
thing
do.
that's going to help with reducing some of the stuff that we see in our life today of suffering,
Yeah.
right? Of suicide and sadness and these big labels people are throwing out. If we just have more conversations and not look at them from a dismissive standpoint, and we can actually agree and disagree, but bounce back and forth in a very healthy manner, I believe that's going to move us forward. And I think that's what we just did here today very well. And I appreciate your time as well, dude.
Absolutely, brother. Thank you, George.
You're welcome, bro.
Hey, friends, Abe here. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode and sticking around to the very end. If you want to support it, leave a 5-star review on Spotify or check out www.maynideapodcast.com, join the mailing list, and stay up to date on all things The Main Idea, from future guests, sponsorship opportunities, products that I'm using to help me perform at my best, invites to ask me anything, and any upcoming pertinent information to the show. I cannot do this show without you. It is literally why I show up each week and put these episodes together. So thank you from the bottom of my heart from being part of the community. I hope you have a great day.